Hello and welcome to show number 42 in the No2Nato series. I'm Mick Stott and I'm a very proud member of the Workers' Party for Britain. And the title of tonight's show, not unsurprisingly, is SCO ALL GO. Our honoured guests this evening are going to be Dr. Lucy Morgan-Edwards, who is the author and former political advisor to the EU ambassador. And we're also joined by Patrick Walsh from the Irish Political Review Group. Now, tonight we will be asking some very pertinent questions of our guests, and we're going to discuss the following topics. What is the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation? Why was it formed? And what was it about? Where was the latest SCO Summit? Who was there? What was discussed? And more importantly, what were some of the outcomes? Is the SCO a threat to Western hegemony, which is also going to be a very interesting question. Now, of course, the SCO Summit took place in Tianjin in China from the 31st of August to the 1st of September this year. And it was a major gathering of global leaders. It featured a number of global leaders who came together and over 20 heads of state, including Putin, Modi, and the UN Secretary General, in addition to international organization leaders. So it's a pretty significant gathering. Can I first welcome Lucy to the show?
Hello, Mick. Nice to see you.
Hello, Lucy. How are you and welcome?
Fine. I'm very well, thank you.
Lucy, for those who are not familiar with it, can you tell us a little bit about the SCO? Why it was formed, when it was formed, by whom, and what is its main purpose from your perspective?
Yes, well, the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation was formed in June 2001. So that was 3 months before 9/11, ironically. And it was really about regional peace and stability. And it was China, Russia, and the main stans, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. And it wasn't just about regional peace and stability. So, for example, dealing with border issues on a regional, local level. But they also enunciated the idea that it was going to be about combating terrorism, separatism, and extremism, which is quite ironic when you consider that 3 months later we had the beginning of the war on terror following the events of 9/11. And of course, all those countries were in the neighborhood of Afghanistan, so were very, very affected. Some of them obviously were pushed into becoming, they had to show sort of goodwill towards the US and had to host bases and so on for the United States. The organization grew to become also about promoting regional cooperation in politics, economics, energy, transportation, and culture, and fostering a new democratic, fair, and rational international political and economic order. And what's interesting is that we've had the war on terror, which obviously essentially came to an end with the US pullout of Afghanistan, except that we are hearing that Al-Qaeda is being resuscitated, obviously, in Syria and so on, as a proxy of the United States, the US, the UK, and Israel. But it seems that the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, together with the BRICS, in parallel with the BRICS, is really starting to come into its own as the Western political system of so-called rules-based order really starts to break down and become more chaotic and weaker with the falling apart of our economic systems and the chaos surrounding the introduction of Trump's tariffs.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, and thank you for that, Lucy. Can we now bring Patrick to the stage?
Good evening. Yes, just backing up what Lucy said. You know, you had the original 2001 Shanghai 6, I think they were called. And then I think, as far as I can understand, in 2023, you had Iran, India, Pakistan added to the membership, the full membership. And in 2024, Belarus was added. There's a few other associate members as well. But, you know, when you look at the SCO as an organization, how important it is. It's the largest regional organization in the world in terms of territory, in terms of population. It actually encompasses 1/4 of the world's geographical area. and 43% of its population. And in terms of GDP, it produces 1/3 of the world's GDP. So it's the most important cooperation organization in the world, actually. So you wouldn't know that by listening to the Western press, but that's the fact of the matter. Um, okay.
And do you welcome it, Patrick? Is it something that you welcome?
Well, of course, I mean, I'd welcome it from the point of view that it seems to be based on a completely different principle from the former New World Order of the United States and the West, which has really brought in, since it was proclaimed by the original Mr. Bush, President Bush, not George, but his father, back all those years ago. That just gave us destruction and antagonism and confrontation for the last 3 decades or so. But this organization is based on cooperation and people trying to get on together and ironing out problems, historic problems that are residues of imperialism and empire and various other territorial disputes. So you can only welcome this type of organization in the world as an alternative new world order to the old failed world order, new world order.
Do you have anything to add to that, Lucy? You look like you might add something to that.
Yes, I mean, I think obviously it's also building on these transport and energy corridors that have been developed across the Belt and Road Initiative and the relations with Russia, Iran, China, the Primakov triangle. Primakov made that sort of statement in the 90s, and that's developed now. And it really is, it's almost like, I mean, as I think I said to you when I was on last, I was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and you really feel that here you are amongst adults in the room, and that they're really getting on with things. They're bypassing the West. They're really talking seriously about how to collaborate economically, geoeconomically, and in terms of geopolitics and politics. And they're very serious about it. I think what's very interesting, and one thing I found when I was in St. Petersburg, was that there were virtually no Westerners apparently at this SCO meeting in Jianging. And of course, also this week, apparently it's the 80th anniversary that the Chinese have put on a big show today celebrating or commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Second World War and their situation with Japan, and the occupation by the Japanese and the end of that war. And what's also happening this week is the Vladivostok Economic Forum in the eastern side of Russia. So some very, very important Eurasian events going on, and incredible to see that the Western media is either sort of dismissing it half-heartedly or just seems to be completely unaware of the significance of it. So once again, they just totally seem to miss the point.
And is there anything that particularly stuck out for you, Lucy, that you haven't mentioned?
Yes, I think, I mean, obviously there were over 20 heads of state from many Asian countries, and apparently 10 international organizations that were represented, including Gutierrez from the UN. The Asian countries that weren't represented were apparently Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Singapore. In other words, the US allies in the region, obviously probably told they're not allowed to go, not invited perhaps. I think what's really significant is that they were talking about the SCO Bank. There's also a BRICS Development Bank, which is going to help these countries to bypass the Western SWIFT system, so to assist them in trading with each other in their own currencies and therefore bypassing the US dollar, which the Americans are apparently taking great exception to. But it's not, I mean, basically it's unsurprising that they would do that, given the sanctions that the Russians have faced, the fact they've had assets seized, the fact that people can see that they need to develop their own exchange systems. What's also, I think, was very significant was that Narendra Modi, the Indian leader, finally seemed to decide that he was going to throw in his lot with SCO and BRICS, because he's been sort of trying to make a balancing act between the West and these Eastern and Eurasian countries, and didn't want to really throw in his lot with either or commit to either. And it appears that he's committing more to a future with SCO and BRICS. And apparently in that vein, the Indians vetoed the membership of Turkey, both for BRICS and for SCO, which is interesting as it illustrates the complex dynamics at play and the fact that Erdogan's seems to have been riding rather too many horses and has essentially been ruled out for his future membership of SCO. And same with Armenia and Azerbaijan, which the Pakistanis and the Indians, I think was it, I forget which was the Indians blocked Azerbaijan from joining SCO this week.
Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit more about that as the programme goes on, Lucy. I mean, going across to you, Patrick, what are your thoughts on what you've seen around the summit? Is there anything in particular that sticks out for you, and why?
Yeah, I mean, just as Lucy said, the new development bank is obviously a really important initiative. Establishing the alternative payment systems quite apart from the US dollar and the World Bank, actually, in a sense, rivaling the World Bank. And I think I have some figures here about China pledged 2 billion yen, which is about $300 million this year, and another 10 billion over the next 3 years, which is $15 billion to members of the SCO. So obviously, China is going to fund development in a large part of the world, which is really, very encouraging thing with no real strings attached. I.e., that you'll get bombed if you don't accept our money, type of thing, has been the past experience of the West. Also, there was an AI roadmap. There's obviously a concern about the use of AI. So, I mean, I think countries are going to try to work in a progressive way towards implementing and researching AI. Well, I think obviously another couple of considerations were there is a thawing in relationship between China and India. I mean, historically they've had territorial disputes and things like that, and there has been this thawing, and so that's a feature of it as well. I think Modi. What prompted Modi to shift position, and I think this might be a further shift. We'll talk about this as you said in the next question, but I think it's Trump leveling these tariffs on India. I mean, that put Modi in a position whereby he had to sort of bow down to the United States or move towards Eurasian development. And I think it put him in a spot. And essentially, it's made him move towards the SCO and Eurasian development. And you have this picture of the Xi, Modi, Putin troika that's sort of emerging as well. So these are all the sort of healthy developments that are has come out of the last few days in China.
Well, staying with you, Patrick, I mean, some of the observer countries, such as Afghanistan and Mongolia, they look to join the SCO. Well, what do you make of those countries, and do you think they would make a valuable contribution to the SCO?
Well, I'm sure they would develop. They would benefit from development. These are two countries that are probably, two of the least developed countries in Asia, and they'd certainly would benefit from this. And in a sense, the Eurasian project is about development, economic development, and basically blending countries together, making them interrelated, into mutually dependent, and through that you'll have less disputes. You'll get business done across a table rather than on a battlefield. And I think it's good for all these states. It will moderate their behaviour. It'll make them work together. And I think any states, and geography is making this an imperative, because really development is proceeding really from around Turkey east to China, and this is a whole big area that is going to get drawn into this area and into this organization's ambit. And if you stay out of it, you're just going to lose out. That's essentially what's going to happen.
Mm. Lucy, we know that you know Afghanistan pretty well in particular.
Mm.
What do you make of them and the other countries that are joining the SCO?
I'm not sure that Afghanistan is joining this time, because I looked this up, and it appears that the other members of SCO were essentially pushing the idea that Afghanistan needs to have a more inclusive government and to be more genuinely committed to human rights, by which I assume they mean opening things up again for women's education, which is, I'm quite surprised, because some of these countries also have Muslim parts of their population, and are quite I mean, they're quite modest, and they're quite traditional societies, particularly the stans that are bordering Afghanistan, and also wouldn't like to be told what to do. But I think it's actually a positive development. It's probably a more genuine concern for inclusivity and human rights than what the West has been touting for the last couple of decades in its sort of pretense that it cares about human rights, which we've now seen, the veil completely ripped off that in Gaza, for example.
Yeah, of course. And Patrick, as well as the observer countries, there were also dialogue partners there, which are countries that engage with the SCO on specific issues. Now, Azerbaijan and Armenia are two of those. And Azerbaijan was blocked by India from becoming a future SCO member, claiming it was over the Pakistan issues and support for Azerbaijan. What is your take on that, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting issue, and it's not very well understood outside of South Caucasus, because I mean, I've done a lot of writing about the South Caucasus and research, and I know I have a lot of contacts there. Now, what's happening in the South Caucasus is very interesting, and it's not really the story that's been presented in the Western media, or either by some sections of the alt media who have a sort of an antagonistic attitude towards certain powers. But if we look at the India situation, what that's about is this: that when Armenia lost the war against Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan recovered Karabakh, Armenia needed weapons. They first went to France. France supplied them with weapons. They were worried about their security. Russia was their traditional supplier, but Russia prevented weapons going to Armenia because they needed them in Ukraine themselves. So what happened is Armenia went to India. They formed a sort of a military alliance with India. And of course, Pakistan is very, very close to Azerbaijan. Um, Actually, Pakistan is I think it's the only country in the world that doesn't recognize Armenia as a state. Would you believe that? Um, not it doesn't. Not alone does it didn't just not recognize the Nagorno Karabakh entity. It didn't actually recognize Armenia, right? So there's a really big historical antagonism between, believe it or not, Pakistan and Armenia. And this relates to the Turkish issue as well, you see. So there has been an antagonism between Armenia, India on one side, Azerbaijan, Turkey on the other side. Now, I think with the resolution of the Karabakh conflict and the peace treaty, which is sort of getting underway, strangely enough, through Donald Trump's efforts, I think that these things are going to get resolved. And if there is a stable settlement in the South Caucasus, this is going to be is going to unlock a lot of these antagonisms, and there's probably going to be, because the other thing about the South Caucasus that's very important is the regional energy pipelines. They run right across this area through Iran, through Azerbaijan, north into Russia. All these regional things in the new Zangezur corridor towards Turkey. So, and President Aliyev of Azerbaijan spent about 2 or 3 days with Xi over the last week. Mm-hmm. So there's very big business being done across these sort of areas. And in fact, the other thing that's often over exaggerated is antagonism between Iran and Azerbaijan, which the Iranian president Pashikyan, he's very friendly with Ilham Aliyev. There is a dispute between certain elements in Iran and Azerbaijan, and it's over Israel and stuff like that. But I don't want to go into that. But essentially, this is looking a lot better than it seems on the surface. Things are going on in the background, and I think that the purpose of the SCO is to basically iron out these disputes, iron out these problems, and I think there will be positive developments in the future around all these states, with even states that have been at war for about 100 years, Armenia and Azerbaijan, getting together for mutual economic dependency and progress, and even Turkey and Armenia. Obviously, we had all the genocide allegations and all this sort of stuff. I think these things are going to get ironed out, and they will be done within this forum. More than anything else. So
Fantastic.
I'm very positive about it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Pat. Lucy, do you think the observer countries and these dialogue partners, the ones are they acting in good faith? And if so, why?
Yes, well, the observer countries being Mongolia and Afghanistan, which we've already discussed, the dialogue partners are quite interesting because there are 14 of them. And I see that they include a lot of the Arab kingdoms, so Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar. And obviously Qatar and Saudi Arabia are particular, and UAE, you could say, are very close to the Western sort of hegemon. Some people are saying that Qatar is also where a lot of Western intelligence agencies have a presence. And so I would imagine that their motives are probably to see what's going on. And I expect that when it comes for them to join SCO, that people might look quite carefully at them before they're actually invited to join. But I do know that the Russians, for example, they are obviously trying to cultivate relations and good relations with countries in the Middle East. They're cooperating already on various issues. And for example, when I was at the forum in St. Petersburg, there were events on how they were cooperating on media and so on. And they had a stall or a sort of part of the in the pavilion. The Bahrainis were there, so they want to build these good relations. And I like Patrick. I'm confident that with the sort of adult leadership that you're getting from Xi, Putin, and Modi, amongst others, but particularly Xi and Putin, I'm confident that yes, that they will iron things out in the future, and that this is going to be a train that's going to keep growing.
And of course, as we talk about the future, how do you see the whole thing developing in the future? Or have you already answered that?
Myself, well, I mean, I see it as it's a multipolar world. It's a new world. It's a whole new system that's going to replace the so-called rules-based order, which is again has been shown to be an emperor that has no clothes, which is staffed by intelligence agents in the UK and the West masquerading as journalists, who take their talking points from so-called think tanks, which are not think tanks at all, but were basically ideas factories promoted by the military-industrial complex. So they're completely bankrupt of ideas. And they just seem to be clueless now with the Ukraine war being lost, and that you still have these Western propagandists masquerading as journalists, pretending that it's all fine, and that Ukraine and Zelensky have a chance to win. They just fail to see the white writing on the wall. They always back the wrong horse. And I think they're losing credibility all around, and people are starting to wake up and looking for an alternative. And I think that this is going to be a good vehicle for providing an alternative with credibility and a good future ahead of it.
And as a matter of interest, Pat, do you think the Western countries perceive the SCO as a threat? And should it be a threat? Is it a threat?
Well, the Western commentators talk of it in terms of one world order being sort of replaced by another. So obviously, if they talk about it in those terms, they do see it as a threat. But what does that actually mean? When you look at it, it basically means that the world majority is replacing the Western hegemonic minority, because for the last 3 decades or so, the West is a Western minority, a small political class, in fact, of these NGOs and these these organizations that have spread like a type of cancer right away across the world. They've been dominating neoconservatism. They've been dominating the world, and they've been holding it hostage, holding it to ransom. They have a stranglehold over the world. But what seems to be happening is that this has been replaced by a world majority where people cooperate and work together and iron out differences. They don't impose their will across the world. It's a different world system that is actually coming into operation. It's not, to me, it's not a threat to the West. Um, the West could, I mean, nobody has sort of ever suggested, I don't think, that the West could actually, I could foresee, parts of Europe joining this actually, like Hungary. I couldn't see a problem with this.
Mm.
But, when you look at the Western system, it was always operated against Russia and it was operated against China. You could join NATO and all these other organizations as long as you weren't Russia or China or whatever, or Iran. So it always had enemies. I mean, this SCO doesn't have actual enemies. And if we look at it from the Ukrainian point of view as well, the lesson of the Ukraine war, and this comes out very well in the book I was talking about a few weeks ago, Benoit Pare's book. The lesson of this is essentially that if something like the SCO had been in existence prior to, it was in existence, but if the international community, so-called international community, had worked like the SCO works in trying to resolve this dispute over Ukraine, Ukraine would still be a state, as it was.
Mm.
It was possible to resolve this situation with autonomy, with provisions for Crimea, and Ukraine wouldn't have lost so many people, and it wouldn't have lost its 20% of its territory. Dialogue is the way to go in the world. Negotiation. But the Western way was war, destruction, provocation, and that's just brought disaster right across the world.
Mm.
And so all this is positive. That's what I'm saying.
Mm.
That's it. And the same question to you, Lucy. I have no doubt you'll have something to add to that.
Yes, I mean, obviously, a lot of this is the root of this is the neoconservatives, in not just in Washington, but also in London, in the UK, in the establishment, in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, in the British media, and so on. As I said, the think tanks, that we have this sort of rot, this vampire squid that has extended its tentacles into our whole political system. And I think, also, if you look at the corruption of COVID, and the sort of fascism that has been growing, where you've got all these contracts going to these big pharma companies, and then you look at the stranglehold that Bill Gates has got over the UN here in Geneva, where I am, and the World Economic Forum, which has made a partnership agreement with the United Nations and so on. I think our institutions have just been corrupted in the last couple of decades. And we're now really seeing the results of that. And the fact that 1.7 million men from the Ukrainian side are dead or missing is absolutely horrifying. And of course, most of them are Slavic men, a whole generation of men. And people, I think, one day are going to say, what on earth, how did that happen? And it really happened because you have very childish people who are not proper journalists. And we don't have proper foreign correspondents anymore. You have people like Isabel Oakeshott, the girlfriend of Richard Tice, writing opinion pieces in the Telegraph as a so-called foreign correspondent. You don't have proper foreign correspondents. You have yes men who are just taking, as I said, taking their talking points from the NATO Rapid Reaction PR unit and all talking with the same pathetic, childish talking points. I mean, they all say the same, unprovoked invasion, Russia's full-scale attack. It's just transparently pathetic. So when you have such low-level discourse, you are going to end up with chaos and destruction. And I'm afraid this is going to play through into the Western economic collapse. And I'm afraid that we are going to end up as a third world country in the UK and also in much of Europe. You look what's happened with Germany. They've lost all their cheap energy. And yesterday, actually, the Russians and the Chinese signed the Power of Siberia pipeline, Power of Siberia 2, which is a $50 billion cubic meter pipeline going through Mongolia carrying Arctic gas to the east, to China. And this is gas that used to go to Germany, which made German industry competitive. And of course, Germany's just going to is now in the doldrums and has recently lost apparently something like 250,000 men or jobs of its workforce. So yeah, if you have really bad people like, Charles Moore of the Telegraph, I mean, that guy needs to be put out to grass. You have all these so-called experts who've been in the military but aren't really experts. They're corrupted by the military industrial complex, by their seats on the boards of these companies, writing op-eds in British mainstream newspapers. So the public are clueless. If they don't go and look further for information, like on YouTube and online, then they really are caught within the parameters of the very narrow confines of information that they're getting from people who are corrupted by military industrial complex and by these think tanks, which, as I said, are not proper think tanks. So yes, not a great future for the West.
No, and absolutely, Lucy. And of course, the SCO isn't the only gig this month. On the 22nd of September, the UN General Assembly convenes. Leading up to it, Antonio Guterres said 80 years ago, from the ashes of war, the world planted a seed of hope. One charter, one vision, one promise that peace is possible when humanity stands together. And of course, Lucy, your take on that, I think it's just been articulated. Has the UN actually provided a seed of hope?
I mean, it's sort of, I'm sure he did the lip-trembling speech about the UN with considerable pathos. The problem is he's one of the people who's been responsible for destroying it. I mean, the leadership of the UN, and I sit here in Geneva, where the UN is largely based, apart from New York, where the Rockefellers, of course, gave them the land to put the UN building on. It is, of course, a Rockefeller organization, ultimately. Sadly, the UN has lost a huge amount of credibility. I mean, still many countries pay lip service to it. They try to go through proper discourse and go through the motions of diplomacy and so on. But I've been to the Human Rights Council here in Geneva and just seen how low level the discourse has been over Ukraine, for example, and how all the countries line up behind each other and behind the EU speech, for example, and they all say exactly the same thing. And it's all this very anti-Russian talking points. The UN, I'm afraid, when it signed its partnership agreement in 2019 with the World Economic Forum, which is on the other side of the lake here, opposite, and is, of course, run by Larry Fink now of BlackRock, effectively what the UN made itself into was a subcontractor of the World Economic Forum, an implementing partner of the World Economic Forum. And again, the UN has completely corrupted itself by allowing so much of it to be dominated by vaccination and therefore funded by one Mr. William Gates. And I have seen how his empire has grown here year after year in the last, say, 20 years. He's completely taken over. And the vaccination thing has come at the expense of looking at other more important issues in sort of humanitarianism, for example, maternal mortality, clean water, access to food, and so on. So, many of these so-called SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which form part of the Agenda 2030 global totalitarian straitjacket, which has been designed by these people wanting this global governance, many of them involve vaccination. And I think since COVID, this is something that has to be revisited, and there has to be proper accountability for COVID and the bioweapons that were used during COVID before we can move ahead and talk about any more vaccination.
Absolutely, and even in my daily dialogue with people, it's surprising how people are now becoming more and more aware of the World Economic Forum and its implications. Back to you, Patrick. What are your thoughts on that?
In what respect?
In terms of the UN, has it provided a seed of hope? What are your thoughts around its future, given what the UN have tried to say, in so much that it claims to have this one charter, one vision, one promise, but the challenge with that is, where does it come from? What is its intention?
Well, I mean, it's certainly, it's seen as having let people down in a lot of respects over the years now. Um, it seems to be pretty dysfunctional. It can't solve problems. We're probably better off in a situation where there's negotiation over problems between individual states
Mm.
and blocs and spheres of influence. We're probably better off returning to the situation actually prior to the First World War, if anything, which does seem a bit strange. But there was actually, as a historian, I do know there was reasonable peace in Europe between 1815 and 1914 when this system operated. It was only it broke down obviously around 1914 for various reasons. But that's an interesting aspect as well because, in any research I've done on the First World War, one of the things that promoted the absolute destruction of the First World War was a fear in the West about the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. And in some way, this is like a premonition of the SCO because what was feared about this railway, which ran from Hamburg to into the Middle East through Istanbul and was supposed to go even eastward, was that it was going to create a Eurasian development. And they didn't. The West didn't want a Eurasian development because basically the Royal Navy ran the world market through the sea,
Mhm.
as the American Navy did afterwards.
Yeah.
So actually, the Berlin-Baghdad Railway was one of the prime reasons for the Great War. You can see this underlying. It was one of the biggest controversies, and so in other words, the Great War and the Second World War, all these things were actually they were attempts to prevent Eurasian development, early attempts. And it's ironic now that it's only now that we're coming out of the effects of the First World War, and maybe the world outside of Europe, because remember, Europe is responsible for these two world wars. The world outside of Europe, the global South and Eurasia, China, Russia stupidly got involved in the First World War, but under the Tsar. But having said that, maybe we're getting a break out of this history for the first time. This disaster occurred between 14 and 18, 1914 and 18, and maybe this is the sorting out of all these problems that have gone right across the world and the Middle East, Asia, Africa. Maybe this is a cause for hope because with Eurasian development, because this was the thing that Halford Mackinder and his heartland theory wanted to prevent. And so there's a lot of stuff in the background that we should maybe pay attention to history about and, have some hope about history for the future.
Well, you know what they say, Patrick, if we don't learn from history, we're always in danger of repeating it. Can I say thank you to you, Lucy, and you, Pat, for your input tonight? It's been phenomenal, as always, and we look forward to you coming back on some of our future shows.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And of course, if anyone is in real doubt as to what's going on and they want more information, the World Economic Forum will naturally provide that if you bother to look. And of course, if you really want to know what's going on, just take a look at Boris Johnson's address to the UN in 2019, because he tells you the infrastructure that will be put into place in order to create what they consider to be a one world globalist elite that will control the masses through technocracy. It's all there. I would like to thank the guests this evening for their input because it's always objective, it's informative, and it's current. And you know what I love about it? It has no conflict of interests. And of course, in this very, very fast changing world that we live in, that's a very important factor. As I say, I have no problem with the world standing together as long as it is not under a globalist elite. And that seems to be the way that things are going. If we look at our country, per se, and we follow it right back to its roots when law was introduced. It was always about causing no loss, harm, or injury to any other man or woman and be honourable in your contracts. I wonder how many of our politicians can even say that they've done 10% of that in their current roles within our government. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show and you will join us again next week for our No2Nato series, where we clearly say no to war and no to NATO. So I thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again in the very near future.